future Indian ambassador to the United States, a future law minister, and a renowned jurist huddled on a warm June afternoon in the Gothic Bombay High Court building in 1957. Surrounded by sculptures of wolves and foxes, they were there to decide whether one of India's oldest corporates, a Tata company, could donate money to the Congress party. Everybody in the court that day saw the danger in allowing companies to contribute funds to political parties. They were there courtesy of vigilant shareholder of the company, Jayantilal Ranchhordas Koticha, who smelled a rat when Tata Iron and Steel Company Limited, or TISCO, amended its MOA or Memorandum of Association, specially to allow the company to donate to political institutions. Koticha's lawyer, H.R. Gokhale, argued that permitting companies to contribute funds to a political party is nothing short of buying over the party. But the court ruled in TISCO's favor, stating, among other things, that it is primarily for the company to decide what is for its good. A year later, Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court, Justice M.C. Chagla, who delivered the judgment, retired and was almost immediately appointed as ambassador by the Nehru government to the United States. Gokhale went on to serve as a law minister in Indira Gandhi's cabinet during the emergency, but the questions that they posed inside that Gothic building still haunts India's lawmakers and voters. The question that then Chief Justice M.C. Chagla asked in court that day was, and I quote, "How is anyone to say that at what point the contribution ceases to merely keep the party in power and begins to influence its policy?" unquote. Welcome to Pass Forward, the Print's deep research offering on issues from India's modern history that continue to guide the present. I am Apurva Mandhani, and today I will bring you the story of political party funding in India. Now, the political funding debate in India is today synonymous with electoral bonds, as we know, the money channel that has remained controversial ever since its introduction in 2017-2018. And with the Supreme Court reserving its judgment on the validity of these bonds, this debate will move forward. At least that's what the top court's observations reveal, with CJI D.Y. Chandrachud underlining that the scheme provides selective anonymity. Now, electoral bonds have done what past innovations in party funding couldn't. They have sprung the issue onto the national stage, delivering it straight to the living room discussions. But as political party funding in India has had a long, rich history. Party funding in India went through a pivotal moment in 1969 when the then Indira Gandhi government banned corporates from donating money to parties at all. But what happened before this ban is as important. Right before this ban, the loss of elections in 1967 in 9 states came as a rude shock to the Congress and Indira Gandhi. While the Congress party won at the national level, it was exposed as weak for the first time ever. It triggered the end of simultaneous elections and the start of coalition politics. However, the loss did more than just bring change in the country's election cycles. Now, the ban on corporate funding was backed by the report submitted by the Santhanam Committee in 1964 on prevention of corruption. It had suggested that companies should not be allowed to participate in politics through their donations. However, according to Milan Vaishnav, director of the South Asia program at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the ban was a politically inspired maneuver. Almost simultaneously, Gandhi also began to tighten government control over the private sector. In a midnight declaration on 19 July 1969, her government nationalized 14 banks, each with reserves of more than rupees 50 crore. This was followed by nationalization of coal mines, petroleum and general insurance in the early 1970s. The result was a deadly soup of opportunity for black money and politics to join hands. The tightened government control over the private sector provided an easy fix for the ban: donations in exchange for regulatory and allocative favors. Vaishnav asserts that this drove political finance completely underground.
The really key inflection point, I would say, came in 1969. And that's when Mrs. Gandhi decided to formally ban all company donations to political parties, right? And that was a politically inspired maneuver because she was looking at rising opposition parties, namely the Jan Sangh and the Swatantra Party, who had accumulated some capital from many private firms. This ban on corporate donations, I would say, we are still reeling from those impacts even today, because what it did was it abolished any large scale kind of legal sources of funding for political parties and it drove political finance completely underground, right? So the contributions didn't necessarily go away. They just completely became undisclosed, in a highly opaque manner. And as import substitution, as kind of socialist economics, as the license permit Raj deepened, I don't even know if you can call them donations. It was almost like extortion.
Now, Indira Gandhi's ban was undone by her son Rajiv Gandhi in 1985 when his relatively liberalizing and pro-business government allowed company donations to political parties. However, when push comes to shove, all parties have always managed to find ways through creative accounting to bypass disclosure requirements for receiving funds. The most exploitable of these loopholes has been a provision in the Representation of People's Act requiring political parties to report only those contributions which exceed rupees 20,000. So only those contributions which are more than rupees 20,000. For such donations, parties have to record the donor's name, address, PAN number, mode of payment, and date of donation. They have to submit an annual report to the Election Commission to claim tax exemption. If this is not complied with, the party is not entitled to any tax relief under the Income Tax Act, but parties and corporations have historically chosen anonymity over tax benefits, and the fix was simple. Break down big donations into smaller packages of rupees, say, 19,999 and avoid disclosure. And this isn't a secret at all. In fact, a recent analysis by ADR shows that BSP declared that it did not receive any donations above rupees 20,000 during financial year 2022. And this is a claim that the party has been consistently making for the past 16 years. And amidst this, enter bond. Electoral bond. In his 2017 budget speech, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley lamented that even 70 years after independence, the country has not been able to evolve a transparent method of funding political parties, which he said was vital for free and fair elections. He accepted that parties continue to receive most of their funds through anonymous donations shown in cash, but he had a solution in mind. He pitched electoral bonds as a reform that will bring about greater transparency and accountability in political funding while preventing generation of black money. On 2nd January 2018, the government notified the electoral bond scheme. These bonds, just to give you a gist, are sold in multiples of, say, rupees 1,000, 10,000, 1 lakh, 10 lakh and 1 crore and can be bought by any Indian citizen or by entities incorporated or established in India. They are only sold by authorized branches of the State Bank of India, and the donor is required to pay the amount through a check or a digital mechanism to the authorized SBI branch. Therefore, the transaction leaves behind a banking trail. However, in the run-up to their introduction, of electoral bonds, the stage had already been set for enclosing these bonds in a cloak of secrecy. In 2016, the government amended the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 2010 or FCRA to allow foreign companies with subsidiaries in India to fund political parties in India. Previously, foreign companies were prohibited from donating to political parties under the FCRA. In 2017, the Finance Act brought in some major amendments. It amended several laws. So the amendment to the Representation of People Act 1951 now exempts political parties from the requirement of keeping record of the donations received through electoral bonds in their contribution reports to the Election Commission. The government has also removed the limit of 7.5% of the annual profit for companies to make donations to political parties. This was the limit that was imposed on companies earlier. And individual cash donations have been capped at rupees 2,000. Now read the scheme, the 2018 scheme with these amendments. The result is that political parties are not required to maintain any records of the donations or the names and addresses of donors of these electoral bonds. Anjali Bhardwaj, who's the co-convener of National Campaign for People's Right to Information, says that electoral bonds have legitimized the anonymity of political party fundings, whether these funds come through cash or through banking channels.
For a very long time, transparency activists, people who have been looking for political reform, electoral reform, have been talking about the need for more transparency in political party funding and also political party functioning. I think the issue of electoral bonds has really brought this to the fore, because Today, we are at a situation where anyone, any corporate entity could be funding any amount of money to a political party in a completely anonymous way, completely violating people's fundamental right to know, and in fact, opening our governance, opening our elections and making them vulnerable to corporate interest, to crony capitalism, and also to foreign interests at the cost of citizens' welfare and citizen-centric policies. So I think that this particular moment in time where the Supreme Court is hearing the electoral bonds matter, and there is a focus on the lack of transparency in political party funding, this must be taken to bring in the reforms that are required.
Now, the central government and the Supreme Court has defended electoral bonds by, among other things, emphasizing on the need for ensuring anonymity for the donors so that they are not victimized or they don't feel any repercussions by parties that they didn't donate to. And this argument also finds its supporters, including New York-based economist Karan Bhasin, who says that this argument holds water, especially in an imperfect criminal justice system. However, not everybody is convinced. While donations are one aspect of party funding, what they do, what parties do with those donations and how much money they spend on elections is often overlooked in India. Former Election Commissioner Ashok Lavasa says that the principle of level playing field justifies expenditure limits on candidates and suggests a change in the law for governing the expenditure of political parties during elections as well. Currently, the law places no limits on expenditure by political parties, while it does place limits on expenditure by individual candidates. Another parallel debate here is the fact that parties have also resisted being covered by the Right to Information Act, a petition demanding that all national and regional political parties be brought under the ambit of the RTI Act is currently pending in the Supreme Court. And that could also determine the contours of how transparency in political party funding could be or how it would play out. As for political bonds themselves, the pendulum of the court judgment could swing either side any minute. However, none of the outcomes would completely fix the issues that plague party funding in India with or without electoral bonds. According to Aradhya Sethia, PhD candidate at Cambridge University, for political funding reforms, the issue of reforms has to become an electorally important issue.
It might happen, right? And perhaps the best guarantee against this is public awareness, right? That it becomes an electorally important issue. That corruption has become electorally important issue, right? But it's still not tied to how political funding works. We think of corruption as small bribes and petty bribes, and if people stop taking bribes, then that itself is sufficient. But often corruption or political funding framework, if it's not appropriately framed, right, could be a major source of corruption, sometimes hidden corruption. And that can only work when politicians think that this reform helps them win elections, right? Or at least prevents them from losing elections. Or that you have you do not know in future, and often this kind of reforms are framed by opposition parties, right, as sort of a rallying cry for voters that this is what will clean. We do not know. I'm not suggesting opposition parties should do that. It's their decision to do that. But there is no other way.
Vaishnav at the same time says that even if electoral bonds are out of the picture, several concerns remain unaddressed, including the lack of requirement for parties to maintain independently audited disclosure of their income and expenditure, as well as the Election Commission being powerless.
I think the larger question that we have to grapple with is, how can we move to a situation where the state doesn't have the discretionary authority to the extent it has now that allows it to have this enormous leverage over private capital.
As for the puzzle itself, please read my deep dive article on political party funding in India. I'm adding the link to the article in the description of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Do follow us on social media for more such videos. Thank you.